Hari Om, all. Let us take a moment to feel the light of the life, Chaitanya, within each one of us and that surrounds all of us. A warm welcome to everyone to the conversation with Professor Gian Luca Burci, Adjunct Professor of International Law, Graduate Institute, Geneva. He is also a former legal counsel to WHO. Professor David Legge, Emeritus Scholar and Professor of Public Health, Trobe University, Melbourne. He is also closely associated with People's Health Movement in Bangladesh. Mr. K.M. Gopakumar, Legal Advisor to Third World Network, and an adjunct faculty with us at Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth, Ernakulam. So I thank on behalf of Kerala student community and public health enthusiasts to all of you in the panel that we are so lucky to have you here in the toughest of the times our generation is ever facing. Before start, let me just state the objective and the structure of the program to the audience. We have invited the scholars who are involved in working international law to discuss with the role of international law, specifically IHR, in the resistance to COVID-19 pandemic. They will discuss with us the merits and demerits of COVID-19 pandemic and also show us some light towards future research. Professor Burci will take the question from the general design of IHR and also help us in understanding IHR much better. And he will help us to evaluate the effectiveness of IHR in a very generalistic and legal perspective. Whereas Professor David Legge would discuss the same question from a political economy perspective, and Mr. Gopakumar sir will discuss the development country perspectives. All the speakers will take 20 minutes. And Mr. Gopakumar, who will speak after Professor Burci and Professor Legge, will initiate a discussion among the speakers. After a brief internal discussions amongst them, they will start taking up the questions, now inviting Professor Burci and Professor Legge to talk on the screen.
Many thanks for inviting me. To me, it's a particular pleasure to be able to have this conversation with an Indian university, also because my wife is Indian. She's from Belgaum in the north of Karnataka, so I feel very close to India. I've been there several times. I got married in Bangalore, so I have a very close affinity to India. So there's a particular pleasure to me. So what I will try to do in 20 minutes, as Professor Nithin said, is to try to give a bit of an overview on the core, if you want, of the legal and institutional, not only response, but attempt to prevent the kind of events that we are living now. And that means the role of WHO as an international organization, in particular as the manager and custodian of the international health regulations, so the IHR. These are instruments that are not probably terribly well known to many international law students. Health law is a relatively young field with just a handful of dedicated international instruments. And so, unfortunately, health law becomes topical at times of crisis, when everything becomes more difficult and sometimes mistakes are made and we find ourselves in the situation that we are experiencing now. So, I hope to be able to bring a little more clarity on that. So first of all, just 2 words about the historical context, because many people think that WHO is the first international organization in the field of health, and the international health regulations, I would say IHR, using the acronym that is quicker, they were revised in 2005, were just for the first time conceived in 2005. But what we have now is actually the latest historical manifestation of a much longer history that starts probably in earnest in the 19th century. We go back 200 years. And they were basically confronting the same problems that we still confronting today. That is to say, how to prevent and to contain epidemics or diseases, of infectious diseases that travel with people, that travel with merchandise, that travel with means of transport, whether it's the sailing ship in the 19th century or the jet plane today, and that travel with animals, armies, and so on. So in a way, the what we call globalization today is not so new. The wave of free trade in the 19th century is exactly what started the movement that culminated with the creation of WHO and with the IHR that we now have in the shelves. The more liberal and more globalized the world is, the more chances there are for diseases to travel and to travel quickly. So that just to, in a way, put a bit of context, because the world has been struggling for centuries, and there seems to be something fundamentally difficult, almost insurmountable, when it comes to effectively stop a disease. It was cholera in the 19th century, it is COVID today, and when COVID is over, hopefully soon, it will not be the last one. So the mankind has really been struggling to give itself technical tools, scientific knowledge, but also institutional and legal tools, because the obviously states cannot act in isolation, and so early on there was a need to have coordination instruments, to have public health defenses that would not stop international trade, as unfortunately we are witnessing today, and that would somehow create a common ground, a level playing field that would harmonize international response. And again, we see the lessons today. Many countries are doing wildly different things, and that is weakening probably the global response. So the world is not learning much, but still we have arguably side, and we also have pretty credible institutions and legal rules. So what was the, if you want, the traditional approach, and what is so revolutionary about the international health regulations? The old approach was, first, we know the diseases we are fighting. So we only address those diseases. And at the time were yellow fever, were plague, were smallpox to a certain extent, and in particular cholera. We know the enemy, and so we know the weapons. And so there were a set of fairly rigid measures, and states could not go beyond those measures, because otherwise they would start interfering too much with trade. The second is, let's stop the disease at the border. Let's stop it at the port, at the airport, at the border crossing point. So we don't look inside the states. We look outside to the enemies that can come into our territory, and we stop at the border. And as you can see, the temptation is still very strong today, and you see it's not terribly effective. The third was creating institutions, common institutions. The first institution that was created was in the Americas. What we call, is still in existence after more than 100 years, is what we call today the Pan American Health Organization, which is closely associated to WHO. So not only we want common rules, but we want joint institutions to manage those rules, to be a clearinghouse of information, to give advice, hopefully also to provide assistance. So all this culminates with the creation of WHO, which is obviously much broader than just epidemics. If you look at the constitution, if you look at the history, it's an organization that really goes in 180 degrees and have a very modern concept of health, health as a human rights, health as the outcome of what we call determinants, which is also other factors like housing, like environment, like water, like nutrition, like access to healthcare, like social insurance, and so on. And then let's continue, but this time focusing on WHO, this tradition of common rules. So the old international convention becomes the international health regulations. And these were thoroughly revised, as I said, in 2005. Why? Because the old approach proved inefficient and became obsolete, because more and more diseases kept emerging. Think of HIV/AIDS, that was a big page turner in the history of global health. But also coronavirus. We didn't hear about coronavirus in mankind before SARS. Hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola, avian flu, and so on. So all kinds of new diseases. And so not only that, but also the globalization of risk. Disease can spread not just through biological agents, but also imagine through a nuclear accident. Remember Chernobyl, think of Fukushima. Also through chemical agent. Imagine, unfortunately, it's happening in India right now. Imagine a major chemical spill in a river and people die in different countries because so that the toxic wave goes down the river. So you have a globalization of risk. And so the modern approach is to take into account all these risks. So just still to give you the end of the context, what was the ultimate push to revise in the IHR? It was the famous SARS outbreak in 2003. I'm sure you'll remember it. Everybody was panicking, the first big pandemic of globalization, and WHO put itself at the center of the response. And there was a very brave, very bold Director General at the time, the former Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland, and she did not hesitate to criticize China, that was concealing cases of SARS, to slap travel advisories that made the travel to Hong Kong, to Canada, that were the two big epicenters, collapse in a matter of days. So do things that first were very effective in stopping the outbreak in a matter of months. And with less than 1,000 dead, it seems a lot at the time, and today is less than the daily report from many countries. But also showed the power of WHO, a power that was disconnected from a legal framework. And so that lesson and the fear of a pandemic of avian flu sort of gathered a momentum to revise the health regulation. They were adopted in 2005, entered into force in 2007. They are legally binding, they're like a treaty based on the constitution of WHO, and they have 196 parties, so they're absolutely universal. It's all member states of WHO, 194, plus 2 small European states, the Holy See, where the Pope is sitting, and Liechtenstein, which is at the border between Switzerland and Austria. So why are the IHR so innovative? First of all, because, as I said, they have an all-hazard approach. They don't just apply to a list of diseases, or not even just to biological agents, but they apply to chemical and nuclear. They even apply to an act of bioterrorism that spills pathogens, lethal pathogens internationally. Imagine that COVID was an act of bioterrorism. The health effects would fall under the IHR. So the IHR became an intensely political instrument. Because they are an interface between public health, but also international security. And that makes the conversation and the politics around this instrument very complex. The second, because being so open-ended, they need to completely rethink what kind of tool we have for surveillance, for assessment, and for alert. And that is the soul of the IHR. There are misunderstandings sometimes. The IHR are an operational instrument that can materialize billions of dollars and put together thousands of people. That's not the purpose of the IHR. Maybe they will be revised in the future, but that's not now. So we have to be careful about over-expectations, because over-expectations bring easily a sense of failure. So we need to be very clear and very realistic. The purpose of the IHR is surveillance, as I said, assessment of health events, alert, and coordination. Try to ensure a coordinated international response. How does this play out? It plays out in a kind of bargain between states and WHO. What do states have to do? States, first of all, and that's been a very unsuccessful challenge in my view, they have to build what the IHR call core capacities. And that means not just having a sort of doctors at the airport or a laboratory at the port. It has to do with the national health systems of states. It's a very intrusive obligation. And so national health systems need to be able to be effective and resilient enough to allow for surveillance, detection, prevention, and control. And as you can see, national health systems did not do very well during COVID. So maybe states, when they revised the IHR, were overambitious, but that's a linchpin of any system of health security. We are as strong as the weakest link in the chain. That's a big open challenge, but that I hope that COVID is a lesson, should be a big lesson for the future. We need well-financed, resilience, equitable, and solid health system. I'm Italian, and you see what disaster we had in my country. It has one of the best public health systems in Europe, and part of the system imploded or was under severe stress in a matter of days or weeks. The second set of obligations for states is they need to assess health events that occur in the territory. They don't need to put a label on them. They don't need to conclude, oh, this is influenza or coronavirus or something else. They need to run what they are observing through an algorithm, literally a set of boxes, which is part of the IHR. And if they check some of the boxes, that they must notify WHO and do so immediately. And after the notification, they need to keep cooperating with WHO and providing information about the event, about the measures they are taking, if they are able to identify the agent that is causing the disease, and so on. And that, as you know, is one of the criticisms against China, that China delayed the notification and was not transparent and candid enough with the information that it had. We don't have the full evidence, maybe we never will, but that was part of the criticism, and that's an essential obligation, because if states don't do that, they frustrate the whole purpose of the IHR. So capacities, due diligence in assessing what happens in the territory, transparency, good faith, and collaboration with WHO. These are the fundamental obligations of states. What does WHO do? WHO becomes sort of a manager and a shepherd of the international response. WHO participates in surveillance, and in a revolutionary change, you can use non-state sources, internet sources, NGOs, other international organizations. It doesn't have to depend only on the state, because by experience, states can be reluctant, or they can even be unable to really detect events in the territory. And so it can use other sources, but obviously it needs to bring them to the state, basically saying, that's what we are hearing, please confirm or verify and report back to us. And if you don't report back to us, we'll disclose the information that we have. That's a big means of pressure. Obviously to be used not recklessly, because you are dealing with sovereign states. So WHO does that, and it dialogues with states. It has an active role to play. If you go to the WHO's website, there's a whole COVID page, and there is a chronology of what WHO did. And during the course of January, after China notified the first cases, it started putting alerts and analysis and advice on its website. The climax of this system is what we call the declaration of a public health emergency of international concern. That's an authority of the Director General. And that also is a huge authority given to an international organization. They could declare an emergency even against the will of the states where the event is occurring. The Director General has to consult with a committee of experts that has assumed a lot of power, because basically what they advise or what they provide as information is always more or less accepted by WHO. So there is a system of checks and balances, but there is also clearly an attempt to depoliticize this aspect of crisis management. It should be ruled by public health, risk assessment, good science, and reliance on evidence. And that's why it was really delegated to WHO. This system has been criticized for being too rigid and binary. It is not realistic to only have an emergency or otherwise nothing, because reality is much more complex. And having a more granular, incremental system of alert would have allowed WHO to really set the response under the IHR much earlier than declaring an emergency for COVID at the end of January. That's something that I think will need to be looked at after COVID. And then WHO, after it declares an emergency, can issue what we call temporary recommendations. These are recommendations about national measures, for example, internal coordination, surveillance, contact tracing, testing, vaccination, but also international measures. And these have been the most controversial, in particular, travel restriction, trade restriction, closing a border to people coming from certain countries, and so on. And if you look at COVID again, not many states have complied with WHO's recommendations on travel. At the time where don't suspend travel, and that's what most states have done. So there is a lot of debate whether the system of recommendation is really what we need if states just ignore them. But that was part, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation, if you want, was part of the grand bargain in 2005. States gave a lot of authority to WHO to use non-state sources, declare emergency, making recommendations that bring an element of accountability because states are supposed to look at them. But at the same time, states said, good, WHO, you set the tone, but we take the final decisions. We are not prepared to delegate to you decision that can be life or death for our population, or they can affect the whole economy as they are doing now. So this bargain, in a way, is what underpins the IHR. Whether it was a good bargain or not, I think we'll have a lot of conversation in the near future. But this is what we have. What are the main things that, in my view, will need to be looked at to strengthen the system of guidance and alert? First, this issue of core capacity. States need to invest in the national health systems. And so that has to be seen as a public good. It cannot just be seen as a machine to make money. We cannot have a neoliberal approach in public health. It doesn't work at times of emergency. The second is to have a better system of alert, not just wait for the emergency, act earlier. The third is a probably more credible system of coordination that has to go beyond WHO. There has to be some kind of coordination system where states are able to sit together and to compare their own risk assessment and to coordinate what they're doing. It's irrational what's happening now. Closing borders, disrupting trade, disrupting the food chain, disrupting the trade in pharmaceuticals and protective equipment for no evident benefit besides meeting the panic. We need to strengthen the system way before the panic. We need to avoid the panic. And then finally, we need probably more resources because WHO tries to do what it can with a small budget. The budget of WHO is the budget of the cantonal hospital in Geneva, Switzerland, where I live, just to give a sense of proportion. And so probably we need to strengthen the ability of WHO to properly manage this kind of crisis at the various stages and to be an agent that can really contribute to the prevention or the containment of this kind of crisis. Otherwise, we'll find again where we are now in a catastrophic situation that in my view could have been, if not avoided, certainly contained had the world been prepared to find tools to better coordinate. And so here we are. I did my 20 minutes and I will stop here. Many thanks for your attention.